Okay, welcome everyone. We are going to have an awesome hour talking about building an AI Center of Excellence. We are going to talk about where you go from here, and we have a jam-packed set of content, and we have awesome presenters here. So let's just do a little introductions. This is Nathan Lesnowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer.
Did Nathan freeze for anybody else, or is that me?
Okay, Nathan's frozen. Please hold on. Hopefully he'll come back.
As CTO, he's responsible. That's a Chief Technical Difficulty Officer.
There wasn't a big storm in Brookfield, but the power was out at our office, so we had to head home to make sure we had internet.
Well, maybe while he's coming back online, we can do intros of other people. I'll go first. I'm Brandon. I'm Concurrency's lead data scientist. I've been with the company since September. Nathan's back. We moved on to other intros, but we'll circle back to you, Nathan. Yeah, lead data scientist here, head of the AI group. Very excited to talk about what it takes to build an AI Center of Excellence. So with that, I'll pass it over probably back to Nathan, and then
he's working too.
Awesome. And then Chris, you got yourself in there?
Yeah, there. I'll go ahead and do a quick introduction. I'm Chris Blackburn. I'm the solutions architect on our modern workplace practice. So as we talk about commodity AI, that is right at the heart of everything we do in Microsoft 365, and happy to share today some exciting things to think about in that commodity space. So back to you, Nathan.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad I'm back. That was interesting, losing connection. All right, so let's dig in. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to frame the AI journey, give you a perspective of why you would be creating a center of excellence in the first place. And then we're going to break it down based upon some different lanes that you'd be implementing within your organization that need to be considered independently, but part of the same seamless AI journey. So when you're thinking about AI within your organization, we want you to remember that you have to start with why. If you're kind of listening to a Simon Sinek video, you're thinking about your business, what we want you to consider is the mission of your business. The mission of your business exists for a reason, and it's there because you're delivering some kind of good within the world. So anytime you're thinking about building a center of excellence, implementing Copilot, deploying an AI project, building something with Copilot Studio, all of that needs to ultimately serve the mission of your business. And what we find sometimes IT organizations do is they enter right here and they say, I want to do that IT rollout, and resist that temptation to think about this the way you've thought about IT projects that have come before us. This is a sea change in your organization, and similar to the internet hit us, transportation hit us. This is a significant change that's not even akin to, say, rolling out Office 365 or something like a mobile app. This is a change that's going to come across the entire business and was going to impact the way people do work within your organization. So your executive team, your leaders need to be thinking about this in the context of the business's mission. And where we encourage companies to start is to back up to that stage to enable themselves to prepare for how they bring AI to an organization in a way that impacts the business and impacts it in a responsible way and enables every person within your organization to be more. By starting at that executive level, that then enables you to move into envisioning with organizational support to then move down lanes of mission-driven opportunities and commodity opportunities that create value in POCs, MVPs, production, and then scaling that across the organization by building governance patterns that enable AI across all the different lanes working in conjunction with each other. So we're going to talk about how a center of excellence enables these activities to be successful so you can see real business impact and not just be deploying a technology product. So as you're getting started, I want you to think about these two big domains that are going to impact inside the context of AI. The first is the impact of the commodity domain. So this is any tool you're using that's enabling AI capabilities that you didn't need to build. Copilot is a great example of this. Most of you are probably already Office 365 users. You can enable Copilot, and some of those capabilities are going to be ones that you adopt with almost no training. And some of them are going to be like, wow, why doesn't this do what I expected it to do? And it's because you haven't learned the techniques and tools to be able to take advantage of that capability of Copilot yet. Some of it is very non-intuitive and some of it is intuitive. And that's going to be the same for other AI capabilities that light up within your business systems that you're using today. Commodity AI isn't just going to happen on its own. It is something you're going to help individuals within your organization through, especially because they're going to learn new human skills as part of that technique, especially the skills of delegation to an AI capability. And then on the right-hand side, you can see mission-driven opportunities, which are really building a data science team, enabling you to create ideas that impact the revenue production or operations of the business in a very direct way, that create ROI and drive down into creating value within your organization. And that's very much tied to the mission of your organization, especially as you think about how it goes to market, how it operates on shipping and building its products or delivering services. Mission-driven opportunities are where you're investing in something very specific to that mission. So those two fall into broad delivery programs within a center of excellence. So a center of excellence exists in order to enable these capabilities within your organization. And by enabling, in some cases, staffing, but in the very best case, just enabling progress within the organization in a way that's structured. In some very high-scale organizations, this means many, many people. In other organizations, it might be a more nuanced approach to rolling this out. Ultimately, you need to think about your AI program in the context of both of these lanes, and then both lanes contain their cycles that are centric to achieving success. On the right-hand side, you can see how human-centric AI becomes part of that picture. And human-centric AI simply means as we take advantage of mission-centric opportunities to achieve value or commodity capabilities, both of those are impacting people, and that's a proactive exercise, not a reactive exercise. How can I enable my individuals in my organization to be able to relearn new skills that they either had before and forgot or have just adopted now, that enable them to be able to function within an AI-enabled era? So this is a very practical breakdown of the places where AI is enabling use cases within organizations. So on the left-hand side, you can see commodity and mission-driven. And commodity and mission-driven, you denote those kind of adoption capabilities, using capabilities, or building capabilities. And then as you start to move over to the right-hand side, you see us starting to break down examples of tools that fit within those zones, and then maybe even overlap those zones to a degree. So as we look at constructing an ability for us to leverage these capabilities within our organization, you can see how the skills that are necessary in each of these buckets are different. So this first top chunk is about using AI capabilities in products. So right at the top here, we have things like Microsoft Copilot, which is essentially like used to be called Bing AI, right? This idea of just using public web capabilities, but still in a commercial data protection oriented zone to be able to ask questions of large language models. Things that you might put to ChatGPT, but you're concerned that if you use that, it's going to be used to retrain. You could use Microsoft Copilot and be able to get those questions answered and enable a person to be able to use that to augment their work. But then you might start adopting things like M365 Copilot, which lets you do things like writing a faster email or drafting a presentation or summarizing a meeting that you're in and its action items, not having a person have to take notes anymore, or looking for answers that are out on your corporate intranet and pointing you in the right places, or finding like, do I have meetings coming up with this person? These are all things that Copilot can do. Understanding that some of those are really easy to use Copilot for, some of them might not be as easy and need adoption assistance in order to get that done. This is using AI capabilities. And then you get to this middle zone where you're sort of configuring pre-built elements. All the Lego blocks already exist. You're just kind of putting them together to be able to achieve the sort of moderate middle level accuracy and precision scenarios. So like if you start at the top, your accuracy and precision is really, really low, right? You're like, I'm getting whatever it decides to pump out at me, and I use it as a co-pilot, hence the name, to doing the work. In the middle zone, you're starting to achieve more accuracy and precision because you're grounding it with something beyond just your corporate corpus. You're being a little bit more specific. So like maybe I'm plugging ServiceNow into Teams, or and enabling a chatbot for my customers in the business. Or maybe I'm putting general documents that I want to surface and enable through a specific chat experience, or surfacing data from my business systems. Copilot Studio is a way to put those tinker toys together and enable you to achieve some moderate results. But at some point, you get to this spot where you need high trust, high safety, accuracy, and precision from the ML model. It needs to do very specific things very well. And that's not the commodity space. That's very mission driven. And that's where you are enabling data scientists and AI engineers to be able to create full custom ML products that achieve outcomes. So high visibility chatbots that you're putting in front of your customer, for example, or a customer service team that needs to answer specific questions about your product. That's not something that you put general AI in front of. It's something you put very specific, accurate, precise AI in front of. Safety stock optimization and demand planning, market campaign optimization, or next best action when you're doing with financial products or potential sale. These are things that you're doing to specifically impact revenue or operations, and your platform's goal is to be able to respond to those kinds of needs. Chris, I know you've had some experiences helping companies through some of these kinds of questions. Anything you'd build on that with?
Yeah, especially the top two cases, especially that Copilot for that public AI access, especially in light of the large language models that are publicly accessible and not wanting to give your company's data to those models. Directing your users to copilot.microsoft.com ahead of getting those M365 Copilot licenses is a great foundation. And we have a lot of customers that are doing that. They're implementing security controls to prevent access to those large language models in their websites. They're even doing redirection with certain network appliances to ensure that users are going to those sites, and of course, tying on some education to that as well. So that's a great first place to start if you're an M365 customer and you're working towards those first few pilot licenses of that Microsoft 365 Copilot, because then once you do have the Microsoft 365 Copilot licenses, you don't even need to access that website anymore. You can just go to office.com/chat and you have that same experience. And it's also grounded in your data that's in your tenant.
Really? Yep. Okay. I think it's important to note, and especially for you architects in the room here, I think it's important to note that all these things are part of the same ecosystem. So you may start with rolling out Copilot, and Copilot Chat is part of that experience. Or you might start with a custom chatbot that's built in ML Studio and surface through a unique chat endpoint. Or you might even have a MLOps project, or sorry, a custom ML project that's not even surfaced through a chat. It's an analytics view, or it's in an app somewhere. It's like an inline component of an application. The suite we're talking about, the capabilities we're talking about, are all intended to be able to lead to each other. So I might enter into the journey through Copilot Chat, but I could have a skill that points to something that I'm doing in Copilot Studio, or I might even parlay that over into a custom ML model that I've created to answer a question through Copilot Chat. So the idea is, when you think about your center of excellence, don't think about each of these lanes as completely independent activities. Think about them as components of your AI journey that need to be part of the same journey. They need to be able to live in the same ecosystem. And sometimes it means that, like, you're not building the same thing that you built for someone else. You're reusing something that you already created. You're enabling some of the strength you already built to be built on top of, rather than necessarily creating a whole lot of independent activities. Or you might create independent activity if that precision is necessary for the use case. So all this sort of fits together into a picture as you start going down the journey. And then, of course, we have this journey of how autonomous are we creating things. That really goes back to that maturity of how important this is to me, and how much the person is fully handing over activities to that AI agent. So if it's a chatbot, it might function differently than, say, what a Copilot functions like, or maybe what a fully autonomous system might do. And in the case of a fully autonomous system, those have an extremely high bar by which they need to function, whereas maybe a Copilot's a little bit lower. It can do less things. And even in this context of, fully autonomous, you have this like range of how much, like, is 100% success or is 80% success, and I can have an exception process that certain things run up to. So Brandon will talk a little bit more about that later with a little bit more robust version of this model. Okay, so as we get into building a center of excellence, one of the things we want you to think about is executive alignment. What are the goals? How do I ensure that these things exist? I won't go through every single one of these, but it's important to note that every one of these questions need to be answered in conjunction with your leadership team to be able to gain success in a broad AI effort. You're not going to get success in a broad AI effort just by tackling this from IT. It needs to be tackled from the level first, and then IT is an asset in making that happen. So things like, what is the mission of my organization, and how does it relate to AI, and how do I even prepare my employees for that job skill change, and what focus areas will create the most impact? All of these need to be thought about as you're going down that road. And then you need to be thought about in two lanes. One is the incremental things you might be adopting, the things you're doing now that then become automated, or it might be disruptive activities that you're bringing to the market. It might be a way that you're engaging as if you were starting the business over with AI as an asset to you. How would I think about my business in that way? So both of these fall into line of how we think about building up a center of excellence, because we're also partnering this with the innovation engine. So every executive needs to think about, what is the mission of my organization? How do I challenge every employee to leverage AI? How do I invoke those new skills? And how do I measure that engagement? And these are things that bleed into the way that you build up your center of excellence, because your center of excellence is the muscle that takes the executive intent and makes it present within the organization. So, Chris, I'd love for you to just kind of talk a little bit about like the ideas around commodity AI. Does everybody need to be a data scientist?
No, they do not.
Exactly. Will impact less than 1% of your staff, right? Like, this is not the skill that in the commodity space, you're not enabling everyone to be data scientists, even data engineers. You're enabling them to be people that leverage AI as part of the journey. But everyone deserves to have AI as an assistant. And this really, what is it you said, Chris? It's something about the draft, right? What?
Never create a draft again.
There you go. And that even that idea, like, some of us have gotten really used to using AI as an asset and creating those drafts. I think the really bad ones have just used it for the final draft. That's why it's called a Copilot, right?
Right.
Ultimately, it's not about data science. It's about enabling most of your employees in this space, the AI practitioner lane, I'm taking advantage of AI to accomplish more. And then those custom ML scenarios all fit over here. This idea of creating something that's really impactful. And that's what Brandon's going to go into. So skills that come into mind there, things that you're already thinking about, but things that get force multiplied as you think about building a center of excellence, that center of excellence needs to think about in the way it engages the organization. Growth mindset, experimentation, end in mind, these all come into play in that space. So Chris, I'd love for you to walk through, like, what does a typical center of excellence plan look like for the commodity lane?
From the commodity perspective, usually that's a great foundation to be thinking about the whole of AI and those use cases in your organization. I think that's first and foremost looking at the pain that or challenges that your users within the different departments, the different teams in your organization are struggling with every day. Or maybe it's not even a struggle. Maybe it's they're doing something over and over and over again, and that's something that they could leverage AI to take and do that more effectively, do it quicker, and give your end users more time to focus on the things that really matter. So that really sits as part of, we roll through the executive alignment, the leadership, and everyone underneath, including IT, are all aligned that AI is that direction. Envisioning is really that next step in being able to think about how to apply AI. What are the right tools to use to leverage AI to help your organization do more? And then from there, really, it's looking at your readiness and your preparation from tools that Microsoft makes available to help your team be educated, all the way through doing some assessments. And we'll talk about that in a couple of slides as some things that you could be doing for putting your organization in a position of success. And so really, even before you license your first user, before you get to that pilot group, there's some forethought that you'll want to put into enabling AI in your organization before it even gets into those users' hands.
Absolutely.
And so here's as we think through what that AI journey is going to be before we even license our users, think about the journey, think about the vision that your organization has. And there's really, as we've sat down and we've talked with different companies, there's really these 4 areas that we work with them to really flesh out how and what they're going to use those different AIs, those different co-pilots for within their environment. It's looking at the different personas and the challenges each of them face. So that's looking at the pain. It's being able to measure how many people do those challenges impact and how much time do they spend in executing against those challenges or those pain points a week, a month, a day even. And then from there, as we start to think about those activities, we can determine what's going to be the right building blocks. Is it really that Copilot for Microsoft 365 route? Or is it potentially even something within the custom route? Maybe it's leveraging that Copilot Studio to integrate a third-party application, or maybe it is a custom-built solution. We will sit down and ideate with customers as to what the right tool is, and then look at what is that priority. Looking at, is those AI scenarios that we want to accomplish things that should happen within the next 3 months, the next year, the next 3 years, how much effort that's going to be. Those usually are conversations that will really gauge when some of those AI related investments or even assistance for your end users really start to come into play. But even before that, or actually I would say while you're going through this journey and you're thinking about how you're going to be successful on those next steps, really there's 3 core areas that we engage with customers in getting them to think about in areas of governance and control before you license your users. It's thinking about your data, your estate, what are permissions in place. Oversharing in SharePoint is more common than you think. And so looking at those areas and how to ensure your data is secure. And if you are M365 E3 or E5 customer, and I mention that because you can use Copilot without things like the Enterprise Ability Suite or other components of those Microsoft 365 licenses. If you do have them, leveraging Purview to look at your data classification, your labeling will help you along this journey and give you that peace of mind that your data is properly secured. From there, we think about devices. Are you on the click to run, as they call it, or the Microsoft apps for enterprise on the current channel? So that's the monthly, that's the preview, that's the beta. It will not be effective for you if you're on semi-annual. So that's really that big step forward. It does work with the new and the old version of Teams. For Outlook, the one that's built into Windows 11 is the one that is supported as of right now. So thinking about apps and their readiness is important. And then even looking at the version of Windows that you're running. The most recent versions of Windows 11, even Windows 10 actually gets rid of Cortana, rest in peace, and replaces it with Copilot as kind of that center of being able to interact with Windows as well as with AI. And then finally, it's the human aspect of AI that really sits at the core of that center of excellence. And it's your staff, it's your teams, it's ensuring that they have access to that content. It's ensuring that they are educated on how to communicate with technology, how to talk to AI, how to have the right prompts given to AI to get the best results. And then being able to, and really taking back to the slide that we looked at a few before this, letting them know that they should be focusing any searches they do within that Microsoft 365 Copilot or even Microsoft Copilot space, and not putting organization information in those large language models in that chat GPT, because it is a security risk. And security is everyone's job in every organization. So these are things to be thinking about as you are looking at that envisioning phase.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. All right, Brandon, take it away. Let's talk a little bit about the mission-driven side. If you're building a data science team, if you're constructing that meaningful AI models within your organization.
Yeah, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay? Beautiful. Nathan, you can, or Amy can tap forward 2 slides. Next one. Excellent. My name is Brandon. I'm Concurrency's lead data scientist, and I'm going to talk about the second prong to the 2-prong process that Nathan just talked about, right? The mission versus the commodity side. My responsibility is to build the mission-driven ML systems. And to do that in a framework, which we're calling the AI Center of Excellence, that maximizes your investment, right? So what do I mean by AI Center of Excellence? I think if you ask 10 people what that is, you'll get roughly 10 different answers. But the way that Concurrency defines this is the systematized approach to how you do a few verbs. And those verbs are on the screen here. It's how you find, prioritize, implement, and maintain AI systems at scale. And I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking through our approach to systematizing each of these verbs. And we can get started with why the heck you want to do this in the first place. So if you go to the next slide and the next one, we will get a sense of that. So really you want to do this to create a competitive advantage if it exists in this space. Even if it doesn't, though, you really ought to be doing AI just for efficiency's sake anyway. That's good for maximizing ROI, taming all of the technical complexity that's associated with building these systems in-house. That includes enforcing repeatability, like I mentioned before, de-risking the dollars that go into it, and then doing all that in a way that makes your people compliant to best practice, right? So going back to how Chris mentioned that security is everybody's job, the AI Center of Excellence is a way to enforce that. So that's roughly, in a very small nutshell, why you'd want to establish a AI Center of Excellence for in-house mission-driven applications. But let's move forward and talk about how we do that. So if you click forward 2 more slides, we'll start with really how to find those AI opportunities in the first place. And there isn't really any secret to this, but it might be non-obvious. So you're starting with either a pain or the need for some vision. But on the pain side of things, let's start with a clear pain that is well articulated, right? And what I've found to be the best combination of factors that lead to a successful AI system is, first of all, that pain should be benchmarkable, right? There should be maybe there's a legacy solution that exists, or there's like a brute force method driven by people that are doing this, or some of the heuristics that folks are using are inadequate. Maybe there's already a machine learning model in production, but it's stale. In all of these cases, performance is benchmarkable, right? That's important for currying more investment and establishing ROI that's sort of head and shoulders above the incumbent solution. The next thing that you need to look for is having, like, the domain that your problem exists in should have data, right? That's sort of obvious, but the data needs to be hopefully a trusted data source. It should be at least cleanable. It need not start clean. In fact, almost every project, all projects I've ever worked on never start with clean data, but they have the potential to be cleaned. And the data set should be big. And by big, I just mean big enough, where big enough depends on the specific application. The third thing that you should look for when finding AI opportunities, though, is that the conditions are favorable to adoption, right? And what I mean by that is people have reasonable expectations for the problem to be solved. Not all use cases have low expectations, right? You can think of obvious examples in healthcare where if you're building an autonomous system to diagnose cancers and so on, you can't really tolerate a high false positive or false negative rate. And so that's an example where conditions are too stringent to really start. So you'd want to start in an area with lower accuracy requirements. And these are pretty common, actually. The other thing to look for along the lines of favorable adoption conditions are the evaluation window, or that period after the model is built that you want to figure out if it's working. That should be sufficiently short, right? You don't want to have to wait a year or 6 months to figure out if the model is doing what you expect it to do. And so ideally, evaluation windows under 1 month are preferred. And then lastly, you want to make sure that where you're starting is relatively undisruptive to people, their process, and their tech. This is not a hard and fast rule, but the easier it is for your solution to be adopted and like the less like disruptive it is to incumbent behavior and habits, the better. And then lastly, on the technical side, you want to pick a problem that can be solved with known techniques. It should be feasible. So let's start with sort of textbook applications. We don't need to, try to build a self-driving car right from the start. So that whole chain of conditions stems from there's a known problem, it's clearly articulated, and the combination of those leads to maximizing the success of your application, your AI application. We can click forward to the next slide. This is perfect. Once you've found, let's say, 5 possible AI use cases, the next thing you need to do is prioritize them. And folks have different ways of doing this, but what we found to be most successful is treating each use case or really respecting the complexity of each use case across 3 of the most important parts, right? The impact economically that it can make, the cost in creating that impact, and then the risk in delivering that impact. So impact, you can back into estimates of this depending on the application. And what's outlined on the slide is just like a toy example of how you might back into the ROI, or really the economic impact of, let's say, a campaign optimization AI system. It's trying to target the right customers at the right time with the right message and so on. The cost figure, this is pretty typical to most IT projects where there's a cost to build it, to use it, to maintain it, minus any sort of things that you can use to accelerate that process, right? Things like using open source tech, or there's lots of good documentation, which is often more scarce than we would like, and so on. The last category is super important to organizations getting started with AI, and that's the risk category. There are 7 key risk factors in delivering AI systems, and those are sort of splayed horizontally across the screen. What I have circled are the most important ones for folks getting started with AI. That's whether or not the project has support, if the expectations are optimal, aka low, and the goal is well defined. Obviously, you need good data and you need the skills and knowledge and tools to bring it about, but it's our experience that not having one of the 3 risk factors, or really the presence of one of these 3 risk factors, support, expectations, or goal, they typically are most likely to make a project go sideways. All right, we can move forward to the next step. Now, there's a couple of animations on this slide that I'll ask whoever's driving to slowly walk through with me. So we found opportunities, we have prioritized them, but the next thing that you should do is, well, as really a part of prioritizing them, is figure out the economic ROI, right? That's the impact part of the equation. And the way that we at Concurrency do this is pretty robust, in that we estimate how impactful economically a system is going to be by simulating how effective it could be based on our experience, and how the business is likely to perform in the future, given how it's performed in the past, right? This happens in a simulation framework that is shown on this slide. Basically, we've got 3 different parts of this. On the left, we have the business metrics that we want to simulate. The example shown is for an AI auto quoting system that we designed for a manufacturer whose engineers basically get requests from prospective customers to build a certain widget, and then they need to estimate how much the widget is going to cost. We designed a system to automatically quote that based on the sort of 3D render, the CAD drawings. And this is really the way that we simulated the ROI of that system. So anyways, there's a lot of metrics here that are relevant to that project, but would change obviously depending on your use case. So we simulate some numbers based on the historic performance. And then if you click through, those numbers impact certain metrics, which we call dependent metrics, right? The win rate, the monthly revenue margin, and so on. All of those drive the 2 ROI factors of a system of this type, right? Margin compliance and win rate. There's a lot of information on this. I'm kind of cruising through it a little kind of quickly, but feel free to post questions in the chat and I'll address them afterwards. The whole point of the slide is to point out that we estimate the economic impact of the solution so that we can accurately prioritize what we should focus on first. All right, if we move to the next slide, thank you. If you move to the next slide, you'll see that economic ROI is really just one of 3 potential ROIs that you should think about. And on the screen, it's called measurable. It's just the quantifiable economic stuff. But there's also a strategic ROI, which is really how doing this project helps you do your business strategy the best with machine learning and AI. That's strategic ROI. But then the third ROI is of importance to folks who want to build this capability in-house. And that's why it's called capability ROI. It's really how a project helps you get good at doing these things in-house versus relying on a concurrency or similar vendor to do it for you. All of these things are super important. The measurable economic ROI typically takes precedence for new to AI organizations, but the other 2 should not be neglected as well. All right, so let's start to talk about implementation. If you go to the next slide, and then the one beyond it, we'll talk about how it's important to phase the implementation. Could you jump to the next slide? Go back one. Thank you, perfect. So the next few slides show how and why it's important to phase your ML project in specific ways in order to de-risk the investment. And so this slide is really what I think people think of when they think of a machine learning system or an AI tool. They think it's this little black box with some machine learning code on the inside. But if you click to the next slide, you'll see that the reality is a little more complicated. And the real AI systems are often mostly non-AI. And that's all the surrounding stuff. There's data collection code, there's code to do data verification, monitoring, model validation, metadata management, all of these sort of more boring, not headline grabbing components that are all critical to a successful system. And I point this out to really highlight how big these systems are. And if it sounds like a lot, it kind of can be, which is why on the next slide, you'll see why we phase these projects into 3 different phases. And so that first phase, there's some animations on here too. The first phase is the POC, and we're only building 4 of the highlighted components. And we're doing that to make sure that the system can first establish economic ROI before we invest in doing anything more. So you're doing the machine learning code, but you're also writing code for the data collection, the feature engineering, and model validation. Once you validate the model, and by validate, I mean this thing can generate economic ROI, then you stop, and then you bring it back to the business and they thumbs up or thumbs down it, depending on if that's sufficient. If it is sufficient, you move into the next phase, which is all about turning it on. So this is the MVP phase where the solution is not full featured. It doesn't consist of everything that it could consist of, but it does consist of the minimum things that let you capture economic ROI. So the point of this phase is to turn the POC on, and you do that by building 4 more components. Those are highlighted in dark blue. The most important of these things is really the serving infrastructure. These are things like, it could be a UI, it could be a managed online or batch endpoint. It could be just writing the model output to some table that gets picked up by another system. The point is you turn it on. Once that phase is done and it's on and it's been running for a little while, then you can move into the next phase, which we call ML Ops. But the whole point of this phase is to make the means of generating that economic ROI reliable as an engineered system. So you build a few more of the components, right? You add some monitoring and automation, process management, metadata management. This topic alone is very large, and we could talk most of the day about it. The point of this slide, though, is to highlight that you need to phase how you develop these ML projects so that you de-risk the investment at the critical milestones. All right, if we go to the next slide, you'll basically see the same information, but just in tabular format. You guys will have access to this deck afterwards, so please feel free to take the time to review that then. But just in the interest of time, I'm not going to drain this whole thing. So we can actually skip ahead to slide 47. There's more detail here on examples of what each of those things are, but I'll let you guys peruse that on your own. Okay, so in terms of implementation, that's really what we talked about before is all planning and design, but then you need to implement. And we're always in the process of building reference architectures for all of the key machine learning steps that are part of every project. So that's build, deploy, pilot, and evaluate. And these 4 things happen in the framework of those 3 phases that I talked about before. So a visual depiction of that, of this first phase, which is still the POC phase, is on this slide. So there's a few animations in here. If you click through, you have the actual steps highlighted in this first phase. There's build, deploy, pilot, and evaluate. You're doing those in that order. The build phase consists of certain activities where you're doing some discovery and planning. You're planning the deployment, building the training data set, doing the actual ML work, validating, and then documenting. You'll notice at the top right, there's a phase gate. At that point, you stop, right? This is when you're done with the actual POC, and then you move into the deploy phase. Thank you. It feels like a real-time like NFL game where you're like making all the squiggles on the screen. Then you move into the deploy phase where you're turning it on before finally moving into the pilot and evaluation phase. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to unpack each of these. Okay, so this is just a zoomed in view of the build phase. All of these activities are on the screen because they exist in every machine learning project. You're always going to start with discovery, and then you should move into planning the deployment, but you might not actually be deploying, you're just planning it. Then you move into building your training data set, doing your actual ML work, validating the model, which is critical, and then finally documenting. There are animations, but just click through all of them and we can move into the next slide in the interest of time. I think we only have 13 more minutes. Is that right on timing?
Yep, 13 more minutes. You're good.
Okay. Deployment. This is a really big part of the project and can be standardized in code more than the other steps, because this is all very ML ops related, right? So you're creating things like YAML scripts to drive the deployment of your environments and ML ops infrastructure. And then you sort of end this phase with testing, both unit testing and integration testing. let's cruise through this to the next slide so that we can talk a little bit about piloting and evaluation. Piloting is really the MVP. It's testing this with a small group of users who have high error tolerance so that they can give you good feedback so you can improve the product before it rolls out to some wider audience. And this could be either internal or external users, right? And then you move into the evaluation phase. On the next slide, we'll zoom into the pilot part of this. Okay, so, actually, we're zooming into the evaluation part of this. Okay, so once the thing has been live and the users are using it, the question is it generating as much ROI as we expect it to, right? This is really important. And you can do this in a way that sort of rhymes across every project. The point of this is just say, is this working? And then there are various ways of answering that depending on the type of ML system it is and where in its evaluation lifecycle you are. There's a lot of detail on this, but we're gonna move forward just in the interest of getting through all this material. Okay, so this is a recap. This is everything we just talked about, and then on the next slide, sorry, I shouldn't have used these animations, should I? So that's the overall picture of implementation. And as I mentioned before, my team is always investing in reference architectures for common machine learning problems in certain business functions. And just to give you a taste of that, which we won't dwell on, we'll move to the next slide where there's a quick picture of roughly what we mean when we talk about our common ML solutions, right? So there's let's just focus on the green. Within supply chain, basically we do a number of things. We'll do things like demand planning, order sourcing optimization. This is basically figuring out where a manufacturing order needs to be processed depending on the network of plants and distribution centers. And then we'll also do things like safety stock optimization. Within marketing, we'll do things like building next best action systems, right? Like what do we do now for this customer, given their entire history with us and their propensity to buy things that are relevant to us. The list goes on, but the broader point of this is when you develop a AI Center of Excellence, you'll want to systematize how your organization also implements very common use cases, right? That's important because your engineers will need to abstract the code in such a way as to allow you to plug that solution in to a number of different domains where the problem sort of rhymes with the problems in other domains. All right, let's skip forward to the next slide and talk about what we do. If you go back one slide, sorry. This is about maintenance and evolving these solutions when they're in production, right? So because we have those three phases, each of which have a different goal, right? POC, can this thing generate economic ROI, to MVP, which is about actually capturing the ROI, to the last phase, MVP, which is about automation. Because we have those three different things, we need a way of quantifying how mature the system is so that we know how to invest resources, time, and energy into pulling it along the maturity curve. And so we've systematized this as well, and on the next slide is an example of this. We are basically evaluating the maturity of the 4 core components of an AI system, and we do that with a specific rubric that's pointed out on this slide. Let's move into the next. Really, the point of this is just show that there's a systematic way of doing this. This slide, I think, summarizes it a little bit better. What we're looking at is the scorecard that we give an AI system. And it can range from this. You'll notice this ties nicely into the 3-phase process I described: POC in red, MVP in yellow, ML ops in green. The colors correspond to the maturity, right? A POC is the least mature sort of definitionally, and it's given a score to reflect that. The scores will range from 0 being the least mature to a 7 being the most mature, where how we arrive at that score is basically by checking different conditions and if they're met in the system. Those conditions are dependent on which component in the ML system we're talking about. But this is a quick way of just getting a gut check on how mature the system is and where we need to invest to improve it. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll see roughly how to close the gap. Now this is an animation that's moving too fast for you guys to probably follow along, so I apologize for that. But what's happening on the far left under the component column is you're seeing 4 components: the data, the model, the infrastructure, and monitoring, that are the core features of a machine learning system, irrespective of how mature it is. So the next column over is that assertion or condition that needs to be checked that determine the score it gets, right? These are things like, is a simpler model better than the existing model? Or do we have the data captured in a schema? And are we testing for these things at all? Are we testing for these things manually, or are they automated tests? The answer to the means of testing, whether it's happening at all, whether it's manual or if it's automated, tell us how mature it is, right? You basically get a number that reflects the answer to that, and then you add up all the numbers, and the higher the total, the more mature it is. We can move. Actually, we have about 5 minutes left, and I don't want this to feel super pressed for time, but we are at the maintenance side of the system, which is really the last step in the life cycle of an AI system. So maybe at this point, yeah, hey Nathan, maybe we open it up for questions or any questions you guys have based off of the fire hose I just pointed at you guys. Nathan, Chris, what do you guys think?
Sounds great. All right, so feel free to either drop them in the chat or come off mute and ask a question. Either chat's probably the easiest if you have a question.
I know there was a question earlier, and hopefully I don't mess up the name, from Rota about, is leveraging AI here means leveraging Copilot? And so from the perspective of, as we look at AI, Copilot is a tool to leverage AI. Copilot in Microsoft 365 is a tool. In Azure, OpenAI, and ML, those are all tools. The real question at the end of the day becomes, what is the specific use case that you would be applying to one of those types of AIs? Those can even be one of the multiple copilots as well. And so that's where we typically will sit down and look at that envisioning process, looking at use cases to help determine which one of these components of AI, even in this example of looking at autonomy, would we apply the specific technologies where as a tool, that would be something more in the commodity space. And then as we move more towards the right, that's where we are, semi commodity, more custom, and then very custom is great ways to look at it, especially based on that maturity level. And as you think through use cases, it's very natural to automatically start to shift to the right, because you want to be able to do more as an organization over and above even commodity. And commodity is a tool to help fuel that.
Yeah, I think there's going to be well, not thing. There will be a lot of commodity AI solutions. Copilot is just one of them. And you're even seeing numerous plugins that are existing in the Copilot ecosystem. But then even outside of that, like your other business systems, Salesforce or SAP or whatever, they're all going to have different AI agents or aspects that light up as part of your experience. So
yeah, there's a lot of companies even starting to adopt their naming of AI within their platform as Copilot. And whether that's actually something that they have autonomously or they built that to integrate with Microsoft, since Microsoft really will be that driver from the OS to the apps to how you work day to day. A lot is really hedging on that Copilot story, both internal and external to those plugins.
they're in danger of becoming the Kleenex of AI.
Yeah, right. Or the Windex, right? Everyone uses glass cleaner and they all call it Windex, but there's probably 50 different types of glass cleaner.
Okay, we'll take some more questions. One thing I want to make sure you do before you leave is fill out the survey. Survey is going to be super helpful for us. We had a ton of content in here, so would love your feedback on that content. If you want the slides, which you can see how much we didn't even have a chance to really get into in detail, make sure you indicate that so we can provide you with the deck. And if you're interested in meeting for envisioning sessions or talking about how we can make this real in your organization, that's also present in that follow-up form. So make sure you fill that out. All right. Any other questions? We'd love to take more questions from anyone who's here. Like the slides, no problem. Thank you, Robert. Awesome. All right. Well, we hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Hopefully this was a great walkthrough of the 2 different lanes. We're looking forward to following up with you and hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.